Welcome back to the 10-Minute Blitz podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Langdon, and on this podcast, we talk about new storylines in the NFL along with new perspectives. Today, we are joined alongside notable public announcer Dimitri Serrano, who announces both football and basketball during the school year and is also a student here at the University of St. Mary. Today, me and Dimitri are talking about possible scenarios which would work best for teams during the NFL draft. And without any further ado, let's get right into it. All right, and we are here with Dimitri. Dimitri, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey guys, I'm Dimitri Serrano. I'm a teammate of Ryan's here at the University of St. Mary, and I'm glad that you had me here, Ryan, and excited to do this segment.
Thank you for hopping on today, Dimitri. And to start off, I really want to do this little mini game here called What If or What Do You Like More? And we're going to be going through the top 5 through 10 picks of the 2025 through NFL draft and voice our opinion of what pick or decision would be best for the team. So let's get right on into it. At number 1, we have the Tennessee Titans selecting with the first overall pick. And my what if or what do you like more? First question is, would you rather draft QB Cam Ward or keep current QB Will Levis and draft edge Abdul Carter instead? As you know, the Titans want a generational talent player. Would you go with the QB of Cam Ward or go with the edge in Abdul Carter?
Yeah, I think if you're the Titans, you got to go with Cam Ward just because I feel like they're in desperate need of just like a franchise kind of guy, and it's kind of fallen in their lap. And this draft, provides a couple guys, but I think the last couple of years it's been, the guy who's almost deemed as, not the most popular number one favorite, and they're going to seem to take the guy who is a little more under-recognized, but also seems to be more talented, has a better arm, and I think they just need a little bit of a reset, and getting a guy like Cam Ward is going to be important for them in their future, and I think a complete reset is necessary. So, Will Levis, I'm sorry to say it, but I think he's possibly a little fraudulent. And, he got drafted sort of late anyways. So I think they knew they were in no man's land, and it's time that they get a reset in. It's best for this organization. They do this now, and obviously while it's kind of in their lap at the number one spot.
I respect that too, and I'm kind of like split on this too. My personal opinion is that you have Will Levis there already. They picked him, I believe, 2 years ago, and still pretty young player in the league. Still has a lot of potential, but again, really hasn't shown it. Like you said, they kind of need a reboot and reset at the QB position. Cam Ward, I'm always really hopeful for those players to turn around. Like Bryce Young last year for the Panthers, he had a really not great first year with the team, but then he really showed promise at the end of his second year. So it'll be interesting if they try to ride it out with Will Levis and see if he can actually have that same type of luck, or if they actually roll the dice with Cam Ward. I'm leaning a little more towards Abdul Carter, in my opinion, just because Abdul Carter seems like the most complete player. Cam Ward has really good legs, he has a good arm, but still a little bit of character questions around that about how perfect his game is. Not a great QB draft class all around, but I feel like Abdul Carter is just the most complete player on the edge too. They don't have a lot of pressure. I feel like Abdul Carter could be the most valuable player there, and just having an edge that can put pressure on the quarterback and help out your defense a little more there. But nonetheless, any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think your point about the QBs is definitely a good point, because I think teams that have been a little bit more patient or given guys a second chance, like, Baker Mayfield or, some other teams like Sam Darnold kind of popping off out of nowhere. And these are guys that were kind of, they were given the boot pretty early on in their careers. And I think Will Levis, he's a talented guy. He's a good runner, and he definitely has some attributes. So it should be interesting to see if they make that decision, if they can get some pieces around, especially on the defensive end, like you said, then it's going to help a lot with the edge. Definitely think that's a good point, Ryan.
Absolutely, and appreciate that. And moving on to the number 2 overall pick, we have the Cleveland Browns, and it seems like we've seen the mock drafts with Mel Kiper, and he projects that the Browns are highly leaning towards Carter to help Garrett. Myles Garrett this whole offseason was talking about how he wanted out of Cleveland, but then he ended up staying for a buttload of money. So it seems like Myles Garrett is staying, but he did want some help on the D-line. Do you think they would actually go with a talent if they don't get Cam Ward? Do you think they would go with someone like Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, or somewhere else in that?
Yeah, I do think actually they're going to take Shador, just because if it falls in their lap, of course, it's one of those situations similar to like the last situation I talked about with the Titans, where they're going to need a QB and kind of a reset. And obviously with Deshaun and stuff, it's been kind of a mess with the QB situation. And, the last time they had kind of a little run at anything was with Baker and, him leading the charge. So I think that if they really invest in, Shador Sanders and his QB, they can, have a chance to get a good reset. But I think, the other options as well are pretty enticing with Abdul Carter and, what he can do on the defensive side of things. But I think, just because Shador's IQ and his leadership skills and kind of what he can bring on a marketing kind of side of things too with his father, I don't know. I think that he'd be more comfortable with a team like the Browns and kind of being the franchise for them, opposed to a team like the Titans. So I think that's where I would go with it is him over Abdul Carter.
Interesting. Yeah, I see a lot of people saying that they would take Abdul Carter. So very refreshing to see a different opinion of someone taking another QB back to back. You have Cam Ward to Titans and then Shador Sanders to the Browns. Very interesting. I'm a little split on this one too. Like I feel like Deshaun Watson again. You have some drama around him. It would be good to get a young QB in there and kind of again reset it, just like the Titans of getting a good quarterback who can deliver the ball well. Ultimately, I prefer Abdul Carter to the Browns. I agree that Cam Ward would be a good fit with the Tennessee Titans, and then Abdul Carter second. Once again, Myles Garrett, Abdul Carter. I feel like that would just be almost impossible and a major problem to block. And then moving on to number 3, we got the New York Giants. So recently, the New York Giants, they picked up Jameis Winston, and they also got Russell Wilson. Also looks like they were one of the 3 teams eyeing a QB in Shador Sanders. What do you think about this? Would you rather have Russell Wilson and Travis Hunter as the pick at number 3 instead of Shador Sanders and already just riding with the current Giants offense where you have a standout wide receiver like Malik Neighbors going into year 2?
Yeah, I think they ride with Russell Wilson here. They just picked him up, and I think they're envisioning, next year's draft class potentially with Arch Manning or something. And obviously, we haven't even seen an ounce of what he can really do in the college football field, but we know that his upside is quite high. And I think that they're in a position where, they could, pick up another piece around it and build for a future. And they know that it's going to be a full reset, that it's going to take more than just 1 year. And I think being patient with this is something that we've seen teams do. And when they're patient, they usually get more progression towards the future. They don't rush it. And in this situation, I do see them going with someone who's not a QB, obviously, of course. And I think that if it falls in their lap, which it should, then they're going to get Travis Hunter. Someone like him is just such an athlete, so explosive. I think that he's going to be there for him.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you here on this one. For the longest time in the new year, again, the Mel Kiper draft analyst, one of the biggest ones, kept saying that Shador Sanders was going to be going almost like guaranteed to the Giants at pick number 3. But as time goes on, again, not a great QB class. I just don't know if this is the right pick for him. I think you could bring up a great point, how you have great prospects like Arch Manning next year who's going to be coming in. So it's going to be interesting how they exactly choose how to handle this. I feel like if they aren't desperate right now, the wise move would be to hold out and just wait till next year when you can get a good QB like Arch Manning. Ultimately, I feel like, they'll go Travis Hunter here. I agree with your pick.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it'll be a funny QB room for sure. You got DeVito, the Italian guy, and Jameis, and Russell Wilson, saying go Big Blue already.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got 2 more for you. The Patriots at pick 4.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of both need a wide receiver with Travis Hunter, but they also need offensive line help. Which one would you prefer?
Yeah, I think with Drake May, you have a piece that is very promising. I think we saw last year some glimpses of hope for them and a successful rebuild. I think if they put some pieces on the line, they can actually make a little run and be a team maybe that was outside looking in last year to closer towards making a run or the playoffs, something like that, in the later seeds potentially. So linemen are, very, very big right now and making teams complete. And obviously they're really, really important, especially for a QB like Drake May. So I think getting a lineman will definitely be a nice piece for them.
Yeah, I respect that decision. I would say that lineman is a smart move here. Once again, if the Giants took Travis Hunter, the Patriots are not going to be taking Shador Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
So it leaves only a few really good, solid, well-rounded players. And to me, that sounds like it would be Will Campbell, an offensive tackle. He's a really good offensive tackle. He'd be really good for the culture in New England. I feel like he'd be a great pick in the offensive line and protecting Drake May. And again, an essential tool that could be valuable in the future. Really, we have the Jaguars after that, pick 5. And then the most enticing one that I think is really a little more interesting, that one, is the Raiders. Now, the Raiders currently they picked up Geno Smith as a QB, and then you also have Pete Carroll. Seems like they're kind of also in that rebuild phase. My big question is they have a pretty good pick here, and we know that Shador might fall a little bit in that original number 3 spot. So would you take Shador here and have him as your QB of the future and learn from Geno Smith and eventually take that starting QB role when it's time? Or would you take another good piece to add to your offense, either than a running back like Ashton Genty or another piece like a solid wide receiver like Luther Burden or McMillan that are also in this draft and available now?
Yeah, I think if Shador falls in their lap, we've seen the relationship with the ownership there and him and kind of the big brand and what that could mean for the marketing and the sales and the future there. So I think if he falls in their lap, right, they're gonna pick him up. They have a couple other options. They can go with a cornerback or a running back and Ashton Genty, but I think that ultimately, if he's there, they're gonna pick him up. If he's not, they're gonna see if they can probably get a cornerback, maybe someone like Will Johnson from Michigan. And then if Ashton Genty is, I think they're going to pick a running back in the second round, of course, because, we've seen that you can find guys in later rounds for the running backs for sure. But a couple options there. I would go with maybe a cornerback or a defensive piece for sure.
Interesting, yeah. And I agree with that one once again. It just seems like it lines up really well where if you get a player like Shador, who, again, is the best second quarterback, if not the best quarterback in this draft class, I feel like with time and development from a veteran like Geno Smith, you will find success in being able to help him develop and, again, work on those things I need to work on, like getting a bigger arm and, again, maybe getting a little more mobility because he already is a really great pocket passer. Seems like Shador has been vocal that he would be willing to go to the Raiders if he was picked by them. So I think it would be a win-win all around. And overall, I think it's a good safety net for the Raiders at that position.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it'll really just be, and if he's there, I definitely think they're going to take him. If not, then with losing, some of their pieces in the secondary, I think they definitely need some help there. And I think that building a defense and kind of a security blanket around them will help for the future and possibly if they pick up a QB in the future class.
Couldn't agree more. I respect the picks, everything, all the way from 1 to 6, and the most, again, engaging, enticing ones that are going to be available there with those prospects. Thank you again for Dimitri for joining us. Any other closing thoughts about what do you think about the draft this year or any expectations?
I mean, it should be an interesting draft. I'm excited for it, and I think that we'll see. There's a lot of variables. Like I said, a lot of things can change based on a couple picks, and they can change drastically. So it should be interesting with the top 2 or 3 guys. Maybe we get QBs or maybe they're dropping lower than we might have expected. And then obviously it's always fun to see how these guys turn out and if these pieces are really going to work for these teams now and in the future. So, and I'm excited to get, talking again about some football. So thanks for having me on the podcast, Ryan. I appreciate it.
Thank you to Dimitri for joining us once again on the 10-Minute Blitz podcast. I really enjoyed his perspective on possible players and possible good fits for them as well. I can't wait to get him on the podcast once again after the NFL draft to talk about the results and what really stood out the most. But in the meantime, thank you all for joining us for another episode. Be sure to tune in again next week for new storylines and new perspectives in the NFL. And as always, have a great day. Have a great week, everybody.